26, 2019 to order at 12 p.m. The NTMC will continue its board meeting. We met earlier and we'll close it at the end of this meeting as well. So I will ask our Mayor Watts if he will give us a pledge of allegiance, and then Randall, if you'll do our invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Dear God, we do thank you for bringing us together. We ask for wisdom from you, Lord, to help us to make good decisions. We ask that you keep us in a good frame of mind for everyone, that we can agree or disagree, but we can still be friends and honor you and each other. Just thank you for the blessings you provided for each and every one of us, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, gentlemen. So our welcome and introduction.
Yes, it's kind of interesting because I'm going to be introducing and welcoming back Nicole Recker-Krim. Nicole is on our executive team. She's our Vice President of Marketing, Communication, and Administration. I'm welcoming her back because she's been out for a while, battling some issues, but welcome back. And
thank you.
If you want to say something, it'd be
Yeah,
great.
no, thank you for the warm welcome. It makes me laugh to see an introduction of myself here since I've been an employee for 5 years. But I went on a lovely vacation, came back with what they assumed was dengue fever, and ended up being in the hospital for 4 weeks, so with a lot of other complications. So I'm extremely excited to be back. DCTA is my family, so it feels wonderful to be back, and I've been back in a part-time capacity last week and this week, and then next week I start back full-time. So thank you, and I'm very glad to be back, and it's very lovely to meet everyone.
You say part-time capacity, but I was here the other day.
I know.
It did not look very part-time.
Some habits die hard, don't they?
Okay.
So where should we not vacation? I'm sorry.
Well, I went to Maui, but
Okay.
it ended up not being dengue fever.
Okay.
So unfortunately they gave me an antibiotic that I was deathly allergic to, and that's what caused the majority of me being out. So, but now I have a lovely medical alert bracelet, so don't worry. Now we're good to go.
Well, we can say it was actually nothing short of a miracle. You're being humble, but it was nothing short of a miracle that she survived.
Thank
She
you.
went through. So,
Yeah.
can't keep a good woman down.
And it's great to have you back.
Thank you.
Yes.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to start with our bylaw modification workshop. So at this point, I want to say a few things about what we're going to be doing today, and then do some introductions. So we have a timeline for the bylaws, and certainly I think it's everyone's desire that we're able to get this completed as quickly as possible. However, I do recognize that we all believe this is new. We're dealing with some new issues. Some of this is different to every other transit agency, and so we want to make sure we take our time, get things right, and then we'll be turning it over to Frank, who has been working tirelessly. And Lindsay, thank you for all the work you and Brandy have done. And so one of the things that we think maybe would be a good idea would be to go ahead and, as Frank introduces the process, start with things that maybe are going to be easier for us to get through, and that we can go over a particular issue and decide whether, yes, in fact, we're done with that particular issue and move on to the next, so that we can make this, as we had talked about, a quick process, an aggressive process to get this done, but yet making sure that we do thorough analysis of all the decisions that we're going to be making today. So, Lindsay, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, first I want to say thank you to everybody here today who contributed comments and remarks and revisions to this process because it was quite the undertaking, I know, for all of you to review and provide that input. So really thank you for taking the time and getting that to us so we could provide to you all that master copy. So what I'm going to do today quickly is we're just going to run through the timeline, expectations, how we got here today, what we're going to do from today and going forward. And then, of course, I'll introduce our legal counsel here who will walk us through the substantive portions of this discussion and hopefully end up at a point where we can actually approve bylaws at the October meeting. So in your packet on pages 8 through 9, there's a revised timeline that you can see. The second page of that, the first page is kind of everything that we've done to date, all of the revisions, the review period through September, and then getting us here to today with that master copy that you all are going to be discussing for today's meeting. The next step after today, we will combine all of the commentary, all of the notes, and agreed upon items, and then those items that may not yet be agreed upon from today, incorporate those again into a third draft, and then send that to you in the October 4th Friday email that you all receive on a regular basis. So expect to see that. And then from October 4th to October 10th, if we can have that as the review and feedback period similar to what we've done this September, where you all review that document, take that back to your respective appointing entities, provide that those tracked revisions in the document, and send that back to us, to Brandy. So then we'll again incorporate that into that master document for the October 24th meeting, and that would be distributed officially in the October 18th packet for that initial review before the October 24th meeting. So depending on how today goes, hopefully we'll be able to get there on the 24th, and I have tremendous faith in the outside and all of our counsel that we have here today to get us to that point, and all of you today. So what you'll have in front of you are a couple of additional documents. One of them is the Master Combined Revisions, which is similar to what you received in your packet, but it's slightly updated so you can more easily review the comments. This was provided by Frank Stevenson and his team, which we're very grateful for. And then Frank is going to have a PowerPoint presentation up on the screen for you, but he's been kind enough to provide an outline of that presentation here to follow along with and help facilitate that conversation. So with that, I think that's all I have. I will now turn it over. Frank Stevenson with Locklord. He's just done a tremendous job to date and worked closely with Joe on all of this. And then he's also brought an associate, David Allen, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, who will be assisting us in kind of taking notes and making sure that we capture all of the discussion today accurately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. I want to begin by complimenting you all as directors for the quality of staff. And I'm sure that that's self-evident to you, but working with Lindsay and with her team, they're absolutely top flight. And that just can't be overemphasized. I also want to say, although we haven't worked extensively, it's been a pleasure working with Joe. Incredibly capable, very, very bright, and very can-do in his attitude. So again, it's only noon. I've only seen a tiny sliver. There could be more than that. But based on my experience, you really have chosen very well with your outside counsel. And then finally, I want to commend all of you. You have opinions, like a lot of opinions. But you obviously took this very, very seriously. You put in a lot of effort. And the simple truth is that what will come out of all those comments and the effort that you've expended, the harvest of that, will be a much better document. So you've made some good observations. There are going to be some changes that result, and it's all going to result to the benefit of the DCTA. So with that introduction, as your chair alluded, one of the first steps was trying to figure out the best way to kind of approach the process. And she tapped into her mediation experience and came up with an inspired idea, which is, let's try to clear some of the undergrowth out of the way. Let's try to get the issues that we can deal with, hopefully on an expedited basis, so that we can then focus on what are the more profound issues, the issues that probably require some discussion. To work sequentially through the document, we would be dealing with minutia, then we would be dealing with something really important, and we'd be yo-yoing back and forth. And I think that would take an enormous amount of time and be incredibly dispiriting. So what I've come up with, based on the direction of your chair, which I think is very solid, is the approach that's on the slide. And that is, first talk about the things that, at least as best I can tell, there doesn't seem to be much disagreement, or there doesn't seem to be much controversy. Can we just agree on those and just move on? Now, this is not to say that if you have a concern, or if I've misunderstood your position and believe that that's the end of it, please, you're not shy people. If I'm moving too quickly, or if there's something I just didn't get, then just stop me, and then we can talk about any of these things. But I think there are some issues that I just don't get the sense really are going to require a lot of discussion. Secondly, there were several changes that were offered by board members, every one of which made great sense, and every one of which would have been an improvement, but for one tiny flaw: they were illegal. So just just that one thing. So these honestly were very savvy comments, and they actually would have made a better document. But in some cases, and I will defer to your general counsel, who knows this area very well too. And I think there's some changes that we just simply can't make. So that's where that is. Under the third category, these are comments, and I could have been totally off the beam on this, but when I read the comment, I thought, there needs to be more clarification here, and with more information about how certain things work under these bylaws, I think some comments are going to melt away. The primary one, and maybe you all saw this, is the definition of board member. Does board member include non-voting members? So people were concerned about, okay, can non-voting members serve on committees? Can non-voting members be officers? What exactly are they? Are they even capital B, capital N board members? And the answer is yes, of course, they are. And so I'm hoping that with some clarification, again, some of these questions, people's concerns will be addressed. And then finally, under item 4, these are some of the topics that I think we just need to talk about. I don't know how else to do it. So anyway, but again, if I go too fast, if I totally miss your point, please say something. All right, so let's start with part 1. These are the ones that I think we're in agreement on. Your existing bylaws, because of the size of your prior board, it very rationally, sensibly had an executive committee. It appeared to be the view of the majority of you that an executive committee really is not warranted under the new structure. So again, unless someone said, well, we could put in a trigger if the board grows to 8, my personal feeling is maybe cross that bridge when we come to it. But my feeling is there's no reason to talk further about that. It should just come out. The second issue that I think is in that category is the idea of maybe not having so many officers. Currently, you have 4. There was some discussion about, okay, does the treasurer drop off? Does the secretary drop off? Do we combine secretary, treasurer? And we can talk about those things now. But as a matter of law, and I'll get to this in part 2, you have to have a secretary under 460. So if somebody's on the chopping block, it's your treasurer. I mean, not literally, but that's the position that needs to go. So to me, the question is, do you want to combine secretary, treasurer? You need a secretary. The treasurer currently in your bylaws, I think, assists the CFO with the budget and maybe strategic plan, something like that. So really, the only question is, do you want to combine it with secretary, or you just want to eliminate treasury? And that's the question.
So my understanding is the treasurer would have to go through some training. Raymond, correct, or Frank, correct? It's like a 10-hour, public fund investment. So that puts a responsibility on the treasurer. And if we have to have a secretary, then let's have a secretary. I would say my opinion would be that we have a treasurer and a secretary, if a secretary is required. But I'm open to whatever you guys think.
Didn't someone have to sign checks? Certain types of checks?
Yes.
And if we don't have a treasurer, who would do that?
Well, there's actually several I mean, I can sign
Okay.
checks.
Just wanted to make sure that, because I know that Dave usually did that, and he was treasurer, so I just
Right.
wanted to make sure.
Historically, it's been the chair, the vice chair, and then the treasurer.
Okay.
So,
It may have been my comment, or maybe it's earlier. If the treasurer's not gonna really do anything different, don't have the title, because it indicates something's happening that's not. I mean, if they're just a board member and they aren't taking on, I don't know that I want some member, like in the current bylaws, tasked with strategic planning and budget stuff, independent of the board. I don't want them doing it, when we're not around. So I don't want to give the impression they're doing something they're not doing, or that they have some role that isn't real. So that's my two cents.
If I could chime in, that's a very persuasive argument, and there are a number of governmentals that will do one of two things: either not have a treasurer for exactly the reason you articulated correctly, because it creates an obligation and liabilities that really that person is not anticipated actually fulfill. Sometimes they place that position actually with a staffer, the person that actually has the job to do. So that's the persuasive argument for basically just keeping the secretary and blading out the treasurer. I think either way you go is fine, but do not want to give someone a title and by implication a bunch of responsibilities that that person actually is doing.
so if we remove the treasurer, then would it be that the only people that could sign checks would be the chair and the vice chair?
I think that's really a separate board action. I think that you can,
Okay.
I'm saying this subject to what your general counsel says, but you pass a resolution and you basically designate signatories, I believe.
So it could still be the chair, vice chair, and secretary instead, as a third person.
You pass that resolution, and that's who we provide for today.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that was my concern, that it would just be two of us and we'd be. So.
Okay, that was a great discussion. So I'm hearing that the treasurer goes.
Next to treasurer.
Goes away.
Lady.
All right, and executive committee likewise coming up. All right, this was my mess up. One or more of you pointed out, well, gosh, if we push the effective date back to the effective date of 10/66, then we may have been doing things in that interim that didn't comply with these new bylaws. So anyway,
Illegal.
I will say with a certain amount of embarrassment, yes, good point. My concern was that you have this interim where you're bound by 1066. It obviously trumps anything to the contrary in their bylaws, and so I was trying to figure out how to reconcile that. And I think I managed to come at it in exactly the wrong direction. What I think we should do is the bylaws take effect when this board passes the bylaws, and to the extent that anything in the bylaws in the interim flew in the face of Senate Bill 1066, then we ratify the distinctions and we just move on. I think you need some kind of savings language in here to basically address the fact that you've been doing things a little bit differently from the way your existing bylaws provide. But that's a much safer, sounder approach than the not so great approach I had initially. So good catch by all of you. Any comments about that? One of you suggested that the definition of capital asset be changed from 5,000 to 75,000. I don't really see this as being terribly controversial. The only significance it has really is it's the threshold that triggers a major decision approval vote, and I can't imagine we want that at $5 grand. So unless there's an objection, I think that's a good change. One of you pointed out, hey, why don't we define who the voting members are? And it is, as under number 2 it is in a sense identified because we have in there now language that says voting members of the people described in A, Roman numeral 1 through 3. and they're listed under number 3. It is in there, but you have to kind of tease it out. So I thought about that. I thought, that's a really great idea. We've got non-voting members. Why not make it symmetrical? Let's have a definition of voting members. So I would recommend that change too. And this is something that is an impressive catch. Somebody realized that you could literally make the argument that if the city was both a founding municipality and also done the tax levy, it could get 2 board members under the 2 different definitions. I thought, well, yeah. So that's just something that needs to be clarified. And I think a very good improvement. All right, now are there any comments on part 1? Okay, now we're on to part 2. These are the provisions. Every one of these, I think was a great idea and a good change. It made sense. I don't think we can do them. I'll go through it real quickly. One of you basically pointed out, who's ever heard of a 3/5 vote? Is sort of what I heard in this. Let's do something more normal like 2/3. The problem is that Senate Bill 1066 says 3/5. So we are wedded to that, unless you all want to. I guess you might be. I wouldn't recommend you veering from the statute. Not even if you made it more
I
restrictive.
think it was me, and it was like, I think it was with regard to the founding members needing 3/5 of the founding members, and I was like, that's higher math.
I read.
It's the difference
Do
between
two-
.6 and .666.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, yeah.
Round
So,
to the fourth.
It
anyway,
made perfect sense.
my apologies.
Who has a 3/5? Anyway,
Yeah.
it made sense. It's just I don't think we can do it.
The U.S. Constitution had a 3/5 vote at
Oh,
one
that's a
point.
good one.
Well, 3/5 of 2/3, that's the
And that's
part
exactly
that
what I
got
was
sideways.
thinking about.
So we did it for historical.
Of course.
Right?
That was what that was about.
I'm sorry. So unless we want to talk about this more, I think we probably just ought to keep it as it is.
Okay.
This is the comment about eliminating the secretary position. This relates back to the conversation we had previously. There was discussion about whether the secretary or the treasurer went. As I read chapter 460, you have a secretary identified as one of your 3 officers under the interim executive committee. That interim executive committee then morphs into your board. So I think that language is still operative for DCTA, so I think you're probably obligated to have a secretary. Someone said, my gosh, we don't always meet every month. Very wise comment. Let's have it 10 out of 12 or something. The problem is that 460 says you'll meet at least monthly. So we really shouldn't change that in our bylaws. The simple truth is, and this sounds a little reckless, but I mean, and if you don't, I mean, what's going to happen? So my point is, I don't think we want to put something in the bylaws that is at odds with 460. But I don't think it's really operative. And I talked to Joe about this. We don't see this as being a huge issue.
Frank, can I ask a question on that?
I'm sorry?
Can I ask a question on that real
Certainly,
quick?
yes.
I know we've talked about the board has, with November and December due to the holidays, condensing those meetings into one and just having a meeting at the end of November, sometime beginning of November. How would we address that if we do the monthly in the bylaws? Can we still modify the meeting schedule
Yeah,
like
you can
that?
also, and cities run into this all the time, you can also pass a resolution that states that you can't spend that meeting, schedule report action.
That's exactly right. And there are all kinds of governmentals that have exactly that obligation, and they just say, we're passing this meeting, and it's really a non-event. That's a great question, though. All right, so next. It's always a good idea to have, and it won't be needed here, but it's always still good to have it in case it is. It's always good to have sort of a escape valve. I don't know how to describe it. That if enough board members want to have a meeting, and if for some reason the chair is trying to stifle that or keep that from happening, there needs to be a mechanism by which the dissidents can still get their issue before the assembly. That has to be in there. It's not going to happen here, but that has to be. That's just good practice, I think. someone suggested, and the draft says 2, one of you, we'll get to it later, one of you suggested just 1, we'll talk about that in a minute, but someone suggested 3. The problem with that is the three of them talking about scheduling a meeting and filing open meetings. So I think it needs to be 2 or maybe 1. And this was a terrific idea too, which was, hey, we got a small enough group here that unless we start talking about a supermajority, you could end up with a really small number of people being able to have a meeting. Let's make it a supermajority with a minimum of 4. And the challenge with that is that you can't effectuate a supermajority in terms of setting your quorum just by your bylaws. It has to be in your enabling legislation. It has to be a matter of statute. So in Chapter 460, you don't have anything that talks about a supermajority for a quorum. So what you are is you're kicked into what's called the Code Construction Act, and that just generally applies to governmental entities. And that would dictate that the quorum has to be a simple majority. A good change, just we can't do it. Let's see. Oh, that's what I was talking about. Okay, then this doesn't violate any laws, and it's fine if you want to leave it in there. It's just that it probably isn't enforceable. It has good language in here about contacting the appointing entities and saying, hey, you've got a board member here that there's a grounds for removal. They aren't eligible to serve on DCTA board, whatever the basis is. And then it goes on to say the appointing entity shall remove the board member from the board. And of course, presumably you hope that might be the right result. The problem is those entities aren't a party to your bylaws. So this doesn't really bind them. So we can approach this in a number of different ways, but I wouldn't have this say that they're going to do something only because it can't work that way. And so again, I think a lot of what's in that change, and some of you had a similar change, needs to work into that provision, but we can come at it in a slightly modified way. Not saying that they're going to be removed. Somebody, and I understand why this is, I think someone felt that this language was just surplus, was redundant. And this is where we're talking about the Commissioner's Court appointed member. And what I put in the bylaws is what's up on the screen, and what struck out is what at least one of you said, hey, why do we need to say all this stuff about and thus not authorized to appoint a voting board member? Because if you are a municipality that is neither a founding municipality or financial, that follows naturally. So it's a little bit like saying, dead corpse, right? It's a little bit redundant. The reason I put it in there, and the reason I would urge you to leave it in there, is because it tracks very, very closely, virtually identically, language that's in your statute. And I think it underscores the fact that, yeah, this person is this entity, this city, is not authorized to appoint a board member. So I would urge you to keep it in, only because it echoes what's in your enabling legislation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Am I going too fast? It's just, I don't mean to be. Okay. All right. Next. All right. This is the third part of the presentation, and these are issues, and you just need to tell me if I'm wrong. But these are issues where I think the real issue is a product of there being a misunderstanding about some things, or some other things I think we can easily dispose of before we get to part 4, which are the harder issues. And I want to begin by talking about the definition of a board member, because there were questions about this. And I'm going to go back in the next draft and make sure it's clear. But what I've done is I've harvested the citations, and I'm listed here. All the people that are in this list constitute board members with caps. The first, of course, are the 2 Commissioner Court appointed members. The second is you don't have any now, I don't think, but any board member appointed by a financial participating municipality. Then you've got the folks appointed by the founding municipalities. And then 4 is the one that I think is important to several of you, and people asked about it. Non-voting members are explicitly board members, caps board members, okay? And then 5, and this is an issue that'll pop up in a minute. What I put in here was the notion that an alternate member by him or herself is not a board member unless and until that person steps into the role of the regularly appointed board member. So when that happens, that person becomes a board member. But otherwise, they're not, okay? So those are the 5 parts of that decision. So my question is, with that information, does that alleviate the need for some of these changes? And if y'all ask for these changes, if this doesn't make sense to you, then just say so. The first is, and I think again I think people thought this was just redundant. But I really like having this language here. This is talking in section 32C. This is talking about an alternate to a non-voting member. Now that's an issue we're going to get to later because there's some discussion about whether they should have alternates. But let's leave that aside for now. Right now, this language appears in the bylaws, and it says that except when serving in place of the regular appointed non-voting member, you're not going to participate in discussions. That's an issue we'll get to later too. And 2, you won't otherwise be considered a board member for any purpose. I would urge you to allow me to leave Romanette 2 in the document because I think it is critical that you disclaim as unambiguously as you can that these alternates are not board members unless and until they step into the role of the regular person. So that's the first thing. The second change is, and this I think grew out of, and there may be a lack of clarity in my document, in which case I'll fix that, but this I think is a direct byproduct of some uncertainty about whether non-voting members are board members. And this person said should be comprised of at least 3, and then it said members. One of, and I think there may be some typo issues here, but just in transmitting the thing, but at least one of them is going to be a board member. I don't think you need that change. I think it should just be 3 board members because that can be voting and non-voting board members. Okay? So to recap, these are the questions that people ask specifically. First, can non-voting members serve on committees? The answer is yes. Can they be officers? Well, as it's drafted now, yes. The only officer position that is designated as to where the person must come from is the chair, who must be a representative from a founding municipality. But there are no other restrictions. Another person asked again, does this include voting, non-voting? Again, the answer is yes. And then the last comment, which I just need your guidance on. Someone pointed out, would it be wise as a preventative measure to talk about when we're forming these committees, would it be good to say that in the bylaws that we're not going to have more than 2 voting members on any of these committees? And the thinking is if you put in 3, you've created a quorum. And I'm sort of split on that. I feel like Joe ought to be earning his living and catching stuff like that rather than having me fix his bylaws. But I don't see the harm of putting that in there, or you can simply just know that problem is there and deal with it as it comes up. But I'm happy to add it to the bylaws based on what the board says.
That was one of the issues we've always discussed before, is having the board members committee meetings, we both also have a board meeting versus just a committee meeting, so having 2 there, it's truly a committee meeting.
But you already mentioned that you could increase the number of board members later on, so do you want it to say 2 or a percentage?
Well, that's a good point too. It'd be more dynamic if we just said something like no event constituting a quorum.
Okay.
Is that better? Yeah. Let's do that, and then that way.
Unless you want to have a quorum at committee meetings.
Well, I guess that's my question is, with committee meetings, that means they would be informal. In other words, they're not subject to TOMA, they're not necessarily public meetings. Am I understanding that?
Well, but remember then, but you then have a quorum of the vote, you have a quorum
Of the committee.
board.
Okay.
Of the board there at that committee, which then would constitute, we have to meet all the posting requirements.
For the regular board? Yeah, okay. Well, an issue. I just know for us, you know, our subcommittee meetings for council, there are probably 3 council members and our quorum's 4, but it's still a meeting subject to the Open Meetings Act and posting requirements and things such as that. So are we saying that if we have subcommittees, they're going to be more informal in nature and not necessarily formal in the sense of public and pursuant to the text?
We traditionally always posted our committee meetings.
Yeah.
We've always said on our committee meetings that a quorum of the board may be present, however, no formal action will be
Right.
taken.
Okay, all right.
Because our committee meetings have historically been open to any member of the
Right.
board, so we don't know
Okay.
what number we'll have there.
Bigger.
Okay, all right.
That's very standard procedure. I don't know any government entity that doesn't post committee meetings.
Okay.
Just for
Okay,
transparency.
great.
So why don't, unless I hear an objection, why don't we introduce this notion that we're not gonna have a quorum of the voting members on a committee. Now,
On a committee.
on a committee, right, but preventative, you may have a quorum
That's
show
right.
up to Joe's meeting.
Correct.
So that's a good change. Let's have it dynamic. Okay. This was a fascinating, you know, you just read these statutes and your eyes glaze open. Someone said, hey, what the heck is professional? What does that mean? And it actually was a really interesting question. The language is taken directly from 460. So it's in the statute, probably should be in the bylaws, but the question is, what does it mean? The reason it's an interesting question is because it's one of these words that's morphed quite radically over recent history. Professions used to be the learned professions, of which there were only 3. Of course, law being one. Sorry,
That could be changed.
Sorry, couldn't help it. Okay,
That was
so,
an oversight.
along with carjacking and, no, I'm kidding. So it's a really good question. What's happened when you study, put the dictionary, or particularly Brian Garner, the sort of the lexicographer actually here in Dallas, when you study the dictionary, what you see is that the meaning has really shifted. And what it's really getting at, I'm convinced, is not, you know, learned professions and traditional sort of understanding. What it's really talking about is vocational versus avocation, right? In other words, this is how these people earn a living.
That's right.
Yeah. So I would recommend, I thought it was a really good comment. You know, you're defining a term that's in a statute, so it's possible that the legislature might not, but I can't conceive of any other meeting, and to eliminate ambiguity, I think you should put it in the bylaws. I thought it was a great change. And again, the thrust is, this is something, looking at Garner's language, this is your principal vocation, or this is a permanent career. This is something that you have mastery of. So in the next draft, unless there's objection, I'd like to add a definition for you all to look at.
Which definition?
I'm sorry?
Which definition?
The definition of professional, and I think all it will talk about is, it's basically, it's as a vocation, you're involved in these things on a vocational basis.
So you want me off this board?
Oh, you're not into these things? No, I definitely don't want that.
Wait, Connie, you had.
Well, one of the things.
Well,
that we-
I've got the government piece, but
I-
that's $50 a meeting. That's not a profession.
Yeah.
Y'all get $50 a meeting?
I mean, yeah, but I mean, no, that count, that's
My
clearly meant to
brother-
pick on you in your situation.
Is it? Okay.
Well, that was my question, because one of the things we've looked for in the past is people who have governmental experience. And in Texas, and certainly in our town, we didn't even get $50.
Yeah.
I mean, most council and mayors and such are not paid.
Right.
So to say it's your vocation,
Yeah.
That's a great catch. And again, I think honestly what this is arguing for is all the more reason for you to define this in a way that reflects what your practice has been. The good news is what you put in here is accorded a great deal of deference in terms of your interpreting what your statute means. So it honestly would be really helpful to make sure these kinds of issues don't bubble up. Let me take a shot at defining it that makes this work.
Yeah, I think,
Does it-
yeah, for the governmental piece, the way I read that is, if you take the type definition, then we're talking city staff.
Right.
Right.
And that clearly is not how you've been interpreted. So, honestly, I thought it was a great comment. The more I hear this, the more.
There's an edge in there.
Yeah, there's a good purpose to this.
Just reading through it, since we've got 3 colleges within our area, it would seem to prevent a college student, grad student, whatever, from participating on the board. eventually you might have a student saying, hey, we use the train more than anybody, how come we don't have a board seat?
That's a great point. The problem is that you have to address it in 460.
Yeah.
It was a great comment. It really was. What I'd recommend is, for now, let's fix it definitionally so that it reflects what your practice has been. But to the good point of the director, maybe something you want to look at, it does very artificially constrain who can sit on this board. I mean, arguably artificially, it definitely constrains.
They could be a non-voting member, supposedly, but,
Well, and if we're looking for diversity, we want to make sure that it's not,
I could just anticipate it coming up in the future with TW, UNT, NCTC, we want a voice.
You don't want a doctor, you don't want, we can't, let's do this, let's fix this as best we can to reflect what we're doing, but maybe long-term, Joe might want to put that on his legislative to-do list, because I'm not inclined to seeing this step.
Yeah, because we're in the box with the it's in the 460
Yeah,
language.
so have professional experience in the field of transportation, business, government, engineering, or law.
So
That's
we've
what the
just,
statute says?
we've
Yeah.
interpreted that with a
Yeah.
looser.
I guess that's what is our harm in being silent on it?
The good news is if we define it in the way that you've been doing it, then you have that difference because it's the agency, it's your its own statute. Why don't Joe and I can talk more about this, but my recommendation is I would define it in a sensible, rational way that then I think would be very defensible. But long term, it's an unusual year.
It was there originally though, right? That
Oh,
yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
part of the core. That's part of the core.
Absolutely. This has been enforced, this has been enforced. Okay, anyway, a great comment.
Right.
I've never made that. All right. This was maybe not a great idea on my part too. You had the language, your statute basically says, you had the language in your old bylaws, your current bylaws, it says board members are subject to chapter 171 LGC. So I thought, wouldn't it be helpful to sort of put a summary of what that means? What are the things that 171 says you're not supposed to be doing? So I wrote that, and some people came back and said, why have we got all this in there, and does this maybe conflict with our other practices and policies? So I'd like to reverse what I did. The other problem with it is, as pointed out here, it's not just 171, right? I mean, you're also subject to 176 of LGC. Also, there's some penal code provisions that are kind of conflict of interest, things like gratuities and that sort of thing. So it sort of sounds a false note as if you comply with that and you're in the clear, which isn't really what the law says.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is I'd like you to allow me to take another shot at that, root out all the detail, and put in language that maybe references these other things as they may be amended, superseded, blah, 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 and kind of skinny that down.
And to your earlier point on a previous conversation, if we start locking it down to specific provisions, then the ledge comes up with something new, and we're gonna come back and make an edit, or?
Yeah, well, I think what I'm planning to do, those statutes, well, 176 is relatively recent, 171's been around. What I'd be tempted to do is put in again, saying these languages may be amended, superseded, or something
Right.
like that, for the same reason that you want some dynamism in this thing, so you're not going back and changing it. It's a good point. And I'll address that. I might just add some general comment about conflicts of interest and gratuities, just to take the full sweep. But right now, I don't think it's optimal because it's incomplete. These are really, really interesting comments, and I think potentially very good comments. And this is where they would be added. We're talking about eligibility, and there are actually 3 different comments here that we'll take in order. And I'll just jump ahead. The first is, what exactly is an unexcused absence? That's why that's underlined. The commentator says, what is an unexcused absence? Hell of a great question, actually. And And then, or that board member's alternate member. What that's getting at is, which I think is really insightful, you have a very robust structure with your alternates to make sure that if the regular board member's not there, you got that entity never goes without representation. It's just it's a nice model. So what this person was saying was, okay, well, is the focus on whether or not this person, this particular person missed 3 meetings, or is the focus really meant to be, does this governmental entity, does this population go without representation? That was a really savvy comment, and it's one the board just needs to decide. But the question again is are you focusing on the board member not being there, or are you focused on these people not being represented? Really good point. And this last thing is just, which I think is a good point too, is these things shouldn't say, you know, that person's automatically removed. The point I believe this person is making is, you know, it really is the prerogative of the entity that appointed this person, right? And so maybe they should be informed, or as is proposed here, but who are we to say you need to get this person to the vote? 3 really very savvy comments, and again, there they are set out in order. So the answer to the question about what an unexcused absence is it's an absence that you guys don't excuse, and that's it. So yeah, that's all there's there. And there are obviously bylaws that go and talk about illness and various things. I don't recommend that you do that. It's basically up to this body. This is somebody to figure out whether it's excused or not. And that's the standard sort of parliamentary rule. Then the next question is, going back again, are you focused on the board member, or are you focused on the constituency? Which I think is a great idea. A very, very good idea. And then the last one is the no automatic removal. Again, the point is, these other people appointed this person. They maybe need to be told, but who are we to be yanking their rep? So those are the changes. What do people think?
I think you just skinny it down and say, look, if the constituency isn't represented in 3 consecutive meetings, then that entity is informed by the board, and you all review it. And then there's no need for excused or unexcused. That all goes away.
That's terrifically economic. I like that. Does anyone have an objection to that? Usually the focus is on the board member and not on the entity being unrepresented, because there's only one person, right? And so all the focus is on that person. And and this is very standard. If you miss 3 unexcused absences, you usually get the hook. But this is, you guys.
Well, I think of it like an elected position. Let's say I missed 3 council meetings in a row. Well, the voters take that into account next time I'm up for re-election. I see cities all the time with censure and all these other things, and really, at the end of the day, the power is the people who are being represented, and they're the ones who need to call that.
I think they're the ones being touched.
Right, and that's why I think it was important, because we're so small, our voting members, 5, right, that it's imperative that our alternates be very, very involved. And so it was more about not a board member and an alternate, but the alternate of that board member. In other words, that seat is not represented, whether it be a county or a city seat. And that's just more because there's only 5 of us, and that's so important. So and then I think, like you said, letting the entity know, hey, you're not at the table, y'all want to do something about that.
Really 3 very good comments. And now it's probably not a secret whose comments there were. But excellent comments. Okay, next. This didn't seem to be very controversial. This seems very, very wise, not controversial. So I just put it in this list unless someone objects. And I don't know if the CEO is right or busy, but basically task somebody at the DCTA to tell the appointing entities sometime within 90 days of when the terms expire, hey, you've got this slot coming up. I couldn't imagine that'd be yes, ma'am.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but I don't know if it should be within 90 days or at least 90 days.
Yeah, actually, I actually may have even mistranscribed it. I think, because, right, 1 day before is within 90 days, isn't
Right.
it? Yeah, that's a good point. So why don't we set that at least 90 days? I think that's a good idea. That's a good choice. And this is, I don't really have any change for you on this. This just to give you a heads up. There's some concern that that the treatment of financial participating municipality, because it's only talked about really in the definitions, it leaves a lot of sort of meat off the bones. And there were comments that sort of indicated, hey, could you go back and look at this and make sure that this really does capture everything in the statute? And I will do that in the next draft. The only change I think I'm ready to make right now is the reference at the end to your new member policy. You have that policy, so it ought to be implicated in this setting. So one of your commentators said, hey, look, can we at least reference our policy since it's out there? But all I'm saying about this issue right now is stay tuned, and I'm going to have maybe some additional detail in the next draft. And now, what you've all been waiting for.
Drum roll, please.
Okay, what I've tried to do is I've tried to group the issues as best I could, sort of by team. A lot of them dealt with non-voting members, so I've tried to put those together. Please let me know if I misconstrued your comment, or if at the end of this you feel like there was a comment you made that you never heard me talk about, please bring that up. I've tried to be as thorough as I possibly can. So let's just, how would you like me, you want me to just run through these in seriatim? Would that be just easy? Okay. The first issue that came up, there were a number of people that suggested, hey, let's have minimum number of non-voting, let's have maximum number of non-voting. These are the 4 specific suggestions that appeared in your comments that are listed there, between 3 and 6, no more than 6, not less than 5, always at least 6. So I think that's a topic I think to be discussed. This later rolls into a kindred issue. I drafted this so that the non-voting seats are considered at the end of each term and have to be continued. That was a concern to a number of you, and so we'll talk about that in a minute, but maybe we could start there instead. But I'd be interested in having people think about and respond to, should your bylaws specify minimum, maximum non-voting members?
Was non-voting addressed in our 460?
It is.
Doesn't give them
I just want to make sure we have the right verbiage that was in the 460.
I don't think it does. I think it firms it out to us to make that decision later in the bylaws. I'm pretty sure that's how we rolled that out.
It's in 1066.
We'll get it. I'm so sorry.
No?
We can come back to this slide.
Is there anybody worried about having non-voting
About
In what
having
way?
them?
Not having them.
Not
In other words, is there somebody that wants to eliminate non-voting members? Now that Chris has left the room, we can talk. It's just, sorry, that wasn't intentional. If not, then I think 6 is a good number. I think you definitely want to be able to have them, because in advance of people coming onto the system, you want to be able to, I think, get them in meetings, get their input,
and hear their voice.
I think the only thing you could change that is if one of the non-voting members became a voting member.
Yeah, then they
It
would,
get reduced.
yeah, I think they wouldn't be qualified, you know?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of discussion was had at our meetings with, you know, when we had the meetings with our judge, our county judge, and I think the spirit of the law was that we would reduce it from 14 members to 11 members, with 6 of those being non-voting. That was kind of the agreement we had come up with, but I don't know if it
That was the spirit of
correct.
this
went
organization,
from
but then it
14
goes to
Right.
legislators, legal counsel, and they rewrite some of the language, and I think that's where it may have changed a little bit.
And I've been involved in writing this, I knew it was, this is in the Senate Bill 1066, well prepared, general counsel had it handy. A non-voting member shall be appointed to the board to represent a municipality in the authority that is not otherwise authorized to appoint a member to the board under this subchapter. Non-voting member appointed under this section may not be counted for purposes of establishing a quorum of the board. I've provided that in the bylaw, consistent with that. The board shall adopt rules and bylaws governing the appointment, number, authority, duties of non-voting members appointed in this section. And that's the exercise you're all engaged in right now.
So we didn't want it in the, if I recall, we didn't want it in the legislation because we had some conversation about that. So we left it to the bylaws, to this conversation, so that we could get to the
That's
legislation.
absolutely right. But it is, the concept of having non-voting members, to your good point, it is hardwired into your enabling legislation.
Now, you just have to meet the requirement, which could be 1 non-voting member. So you have that conversation. I don't have an issue with 6.
I mean, you're talking about always be authorized to have 6 or up to 6, or?
I think the up to 6. Or at no time more than 6.
As long as there's a minimum, I mean, you can have too many people, right?
Yeah, the enabling legislation sets a floor of 1
Yeah, that just doesn't seem.
and a ceiling of 6.
Wasn't there a discussion of it being 11?
That's true, but because at our meetings, we said we would address it in the bylaws, and
Okay.
those meetings entailed going from a 14 board member to an 11. I don't think we can force people to put people on the board, so yeah, to say that we will always have 6, we can't say that.
Authorized,
Huh?
always authorized.
Right, but I think Senator Nelson changed in there that, not that we may have, but that we shall have.
Yeah.
Right?
It says shall.
We asked her, because there was a mix-up with her people, what that meant, and so then she changed it to say may have alternates to shall have. I mean, non-voting, I'm sorry.
So, yeah, so that's what locks the 1. Because there's no quantity in there, is there?
Well,
It's
it
plural.
says 1 per municipality that's not otherwise got a board member. So it isn't necessarily capped at 1, and you don't have to necessarily have 1 for every single city. It's just, when it talks about 1, it means 1 per
Right.
municipality.
Okay, okay.
That's all that means. It's not a hard stop necessarily.
So would we be in violation of the statute if we put a cap at 6?
I don't think so, because it tells you that you're allowed to come up with rules and bylaws governing the appointment, the number,
Okay.
the authority. So yeah, you're acting right between the lines on this. This is what they want you to do. But again, it very clearly anticipates you're going to have some of these people.
What was the algorithm we used to get the 6, or have we, to retain the 1s, or, I thought I heard something about the 5 largest cities and then small cities. What, have we had some kind of standard in the past that would help define that?
There was a standard in the past.
When we were all in the room with commissioners, to your point, we had a certain number of board members. We were looking at how many larger cities, how many small cities, how many county reps we have are at large. We recognized that we probably didn't make sense to have the same number. but reducing it beyond, lower than 6 would likely eliminate one of the larger cities, and we still wanted to have a rep for small cities. So we literally went to our boards by position, and we said, well, let's do some consolidation here. And I don't think there was any hard math or arithmetic on it. It was just 11 looks reasonable, because if you get below that, then you're going to start having some question about, well, who gets left off? Is it the Colony? Is it Frisco? Is it Flower Mound? And that's how I think we ultimately just looked at it and said, this seemed reasonable. And we talked a lot about, but what does that need to be? Same conversation we're having now.
Well, so not only do we need to decide how many, we have to decide how those are chosen. Is it the 5 largest cities that aren't founding members that get one, and then there's small, so I'm not sure how those non-voting board members are chosen, or we've got to figure out how do we choose them, because if they're representing municipalities, then
Right.
how do they get picked?
And I'd want to make
or
sure that
just determined.
you wouldn't be able to get a double dip in the fact that you get appointed as a county, but you're also one of those 5 or 6.
Yeah, and I think
I think we
went
got
over
that covered, but.
Yeah, let me read you, this, again, this applies, this is the transitional language that came out of 1066, but this is also baked into the draft of bylaws. This at least explains what you did to get where you are now. The following 6 non-voting members shall constitute, quote, the initial non-voting members. On the effective date of these bylaws, the then currently serving members of the board appointed by the municipalities of Corinth, Flower Mound, Frisco, Little Elm, and Colony. And then it goes on to say, each of which being a municipality with a population of 17,000 or more that satisfies these other sections, meaning they don't already have a board member, shall each assume the position of non-voting member bylaw. Additionally, the Denton County Commissioners Court shall assume as practicable after the effective date designate one then currently serving member of the board appointed by a municipality with a population of more than 500 but less than 17,000, and that person becomes another. So what you did was what in this tracks your transitional language. So it's not in the legislation, but it's that language that at least gets you from Massachusetts go forward. But anyway, it says 5 from more than 17,000 and 1 570,000. So does that answer your question there?
It does for now. Of course, I think, Denton County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country, so I think it's very easy that some of these cities that are not over 17,000 can get to over. So it's just how do we decide what chooses those
Well, you've
non-voting?
increased
So right
the
now, we got it.
population over time now.
Do it.
The original statute, I believe, had the language of 10,000, went
Right.
10,000, 12,000.
So that can be changed.
Yeah, you've changed it over years.
Through the legislation or through the
No,
bylaws?
through the bylaws.
So again, remember, determining the number of these people is explicitly by statute your prerogative. So you get to do that. In fact, you're supposed to do that as part of the bylaws. But anyway, you're right. But this is just how you got from there to here.
Those 6 were.
Yeah,
That seems
I
reasonable.
don't have an issue with that language necessarily being incorporated in at least for now, and as things change, the board can change that as needed.
I mean, there's no reason a municipality in Denton County that says, hey, we want to have a voice in DCTA, we'd like to join and be involved, and we can have that conversation about, do we change the structure to get them a seat? And we can always come back to the bylaws.
Right.
Going once, twice. So, that's good. Good conversation. All right, next. The draft, another issue about whether or not do the non-voting members have alternates. And it's, the voting members obviously do, so do the non-voting members have alternates?
What do you think, Joe? Joe is an alternate of the colony.
Makes no difference to me.
Yeah. Well, again, in identifying the importance of our non-voting members and Corinne's a great example, has sat here, and now will be looking to come in, hopefully, to DCTA as a financial investor. And so the goal, I believe, of the non-voting is to to sit here and work with us to bring information if we're looking at things from a regional perspective. And while the alternates, as the non-voting board members won't be voting, I still think it's important for them, especially since we're having meetings only once a month, for them to come in and participate and be a part of the discussion so that they can go back and talk to their entities about what we are doing, and we just don't have that gap because someone couldn't make it a meeting or two, since we're only now down to a meeting a month.
Can we
That's
give
my-
the whoever the non-voting member represents the option of having an alternate that they can appoint? One
Yeah,
alternate?
I mean,
Just kind of put it
Sure.
on them.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
if
I
y'all
just-
want to appoint an alternate, so just so we need to know who it is, right? So it's not changing all
yeah.
the time, right? And then they can have an alternate
That's,
if they wish.
yeah. I just want to make sure they have the
Yeah.
opportunity
So we
to
got
have
to
an
just
alternate
change
if
it
they
to
like.
Yeah.
they have an alternate.
Yeah, I'm-
We don't have to do anything
I'm gonna
about
push
it.
back on that.
Okay.
I'm just, functionally, it doesn't make any sense. They don't vote. If they can't make it, they're going to get all that information. We're gonna add another 6 people that the staff has to go keep contacting and keep in the loop of things. I just, if that entity wants to have a person here, we have an open meeting, there's a gallery, and it's one less thing we have to track and mess with.
So are you saying one less thing that the board or staff has to track?
Yes. Yes,
Both?
all of it. That's 6 more people I have to deal with,
Yeah.
so.
Actually, we've reduced the number of board members, so, obviously, if they believe it's important to have, an alternate to sit at the table, I think we should allow them that opportunity, and I don't think it's that much work. If they choose not to come, I mean, we're just sending out the email, and we don't have to send the emails to the alternate, we can send it, and if they tell their, he told Joe today he wasn't gonna be here. We didn't have to contact Joe, he just told Joe, I'm not gonna be here, he let us know he wasn't gonna be here, but Joe was gonna be coming, so I just wanna give them the option.
And the language is currently permissive, is may. So.
I just don't think I don't think it's going to create more work for the staff, and I agree with Diane. And to the extent that the bylaws create an obligation on the staff to do an additional notice, we should take that out. They can appoint one if they want one, right? We know about it, and if somebody can't come, then that person can come, but they're in charge of notifying and doing all the work. And are you worried about 2 of them coming?
It's another body that's part of this deliberative body that we have to deal with. And the fewer moving parts, the simpler it is.
Tom?
A question, I can't remember if Raymond was there or if it was Jim Klein, but when the city managers of the lake cities got together, it was discussed about having an alternate beyond me for the lake cities, whether it be Lake Dallas, Hickory Creek, Shady Shores, whatever. So at least, because we were still trying to get the other municipalities involved with possibly being a member. Nothing's come of it, but I remember it coming up for discussion, that perhaps if, we were trying to get Lake Dallas to contribute more money, maybe they could be an alternate member. Nothing's come of it, but it could conceivably in the future. If Lake Cities became one municipality, it takes care of itself, but that's not the case now. So I just bring it up because it was brought up at one time with the other city managers.
I think for me, I don't have heartburn either way, except my biggest question is, I'm still not quite understanding, we're gonna get to it later on about executive sessions and things such as that. I'm sometimes trying to understand, I understand for the non-voting board members, a lot of that is informational and working together with, what's happening. So if we're gonna say that we want the alternates for our cities to be the 5 board members, I think what I'm hearing you say is, even if I'm here, you want the alternate, ideally, for the city of Denton to be here so that they're understanding exactly what's going on, so that if I'm absent and they sit here, they're just not sitting here totally lost as to what's being processed, what's being talked about. And is that the same perception or the same desire for the non-voting board members? In other words, is the only difference between the non-voting board members and the voting board members is simply that act of voting? I'm still trying to understand exactly. Of course, we want the input, we want the deliberation, and if that's the primary goal, then I think to have an alternate member would need to be more than just, oh, if you want to be here, fine. If not, that's okay, because that's not what's being asked of quote unquote the voting members. So I'm trying to understand the distinction, even though we've got it definitionally up there, but also how does it work pragmatically in the deliberative process and in just the overall process of the meeting and the issue, determining the issues or answering the questions. So having another body here, somebody, but if we're going to be asked for the alternates to be as much participant as the regular board members, then I would expect that to be the same for non-voting board members and their alternates. But then that raises the question too, if we're getting to executive session, and then I've got some thoughts or some just questions on that. But
I don't think you can make it that difficult. I think it's really just, as Joe's done here, I mean, he comes in, he listens as an alternate, and probably reports back to Alan or whoever else in the city, and that's it. That's all we're talking about. I don't think we need to have, like, you guys have your alternates here all the time. It's really just, hey, if I can't make it for some reason, I just want to have a voice, or not even a voice necessarily, just someone to listen and say, report back. If they're going to be here, great. And we have that person come as an alternate. That's it. I think that's kind of where Diane was going.
Well, and Mayor, I wasn't stressing that our alternates need to be here, because I trust that we're going to relay information to our alternates.
okay, I misunderstood that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that if we can't be here, that they really
Sure,
need to
of
make the
course.
effort to be here. But I don't feel like they need to be here. I mean, I'll relay information back to my alternate, and especially if I'm not going to be here. So I'm not saying that I feel they need to be here if we're here.
Okay.
So yeah, I wouldn't hold them to, a different standard, because I think that's what happens. They report back. I'm sure, Alan reports. Joe's going to go back and report to them just like we would to our entity. So it's not that I feel like they always need to be here. I'm glad they are.
Can I interject one more thing?
Yes, sir.
When I was appointed to this position, city council in Frisco was adamant about there being an alternate so that the seat was empty. And it hasn't worked out that way not right now, but that is still needs to be readdressed.
I think the difference is if you just come to the meetings, a member of the public, you have an opportunity to address the board for 3 minutes to give them time, not really participate in the discussion. I think that's a significant difference. No, I don't think they should be in the executive.
That actually anticipates another question that I have for y'all a little bit later, which is, if I'm sitting here as an alternate, am I able to participate in discussions? Or if I've got the regular person here as he or she's, then that's what I hear your comment, right?
Yeah, and we just had some really good feedback from the alternates, and it may have been during a work session.
We'll get to that
Anyway.
because I think there are issues there too. Okay, so, I'm sorry, what are we even talking about? Okay. All right, so we're authorizing, correct me if I'm wrong, we're authorizing 6, is that what we're doing?
Up to.
Up to 6?
We can't enforce it.
Oh, no, right, but, yes, okay, it's up to them to appoint something, right. But we've approved 6, and they can fill it out. Right, that's absolutely right. And then non-voting members having alternates, am I hearing yes?
I'm not gonna fall on my sword on that one. I don't think I think there's some other issues regarding alternates for non-voting board members that is more dispositive to me than just not having them be able to even be in the room, period. So I'm okay with that, given some of the other discussion that we're gonna have later on.
And Mayor, maybe what we ought to do, because it was a roll of the dice as to what order to take this, maybe we ought to have the understanding that until we've agreed on all of these
don't we tentatively say yes on alternates, and let's then move to the next deal. So we got 6, we got alternates.
Is it a yes, they can have them, or yes, they have to have them?
Yes, they can.
Authorized to say
They can.
Make them do it.
Yeah, yeah. It's
They don't
not
wanna have
just a
one.
comment. We can't compel one of these cities to have it on, to appoint our voters, but they can. Is that?
That's how I understand it.
All right, I think, and I could be totally, well, I don't know what it is. If we're agreeing it's gonna be 6, then I'm not sure this is terribly compatible with that. This is a provision that allowed, that actually required at the end of the term that the seat would be reauthorized. And what I'm hearing from y'all, I'm not trying to push in any direction, but I think we've sort of moved past this. If we're gonna have 6, then the seats don't vaporize.
Is that what this was saying, that the board could technically, subject to the legislation, say, no, we only want?
Yeah, the way it was drafted, they just went away if you didn't take any
Right.
action. And I think I was the one.
Whoa.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
It was pretty, I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure you all were paying attention. No, I didn't know,
Well played.
and believe me, you were. But I didn't know exactly how you wanted to do this, and this was I sort of managed to get people on both sides angry, so I think I did a good job. But anyway, the point is, on that one, I think
Martin,
that's,
good
I think
company.
we've moved past that.
Yeah.
I think the answer to that is no.
Yeah.
All right, now, Mayor, here's one of your issues. Okay, so.
What? Not necessarily issue yet. Yeah.
And he's not angry. He just raises his voice all the time.
So anger is a secondary
That's raising my
emotion only
voice,
to
man.
pain, fear, and injustice. So there's my psychology of the day.
Yeah, there you go. Here's an inquiry that the mayor had.
Very good, thank you.
Prefer
And so,
inquisition.
the language I put in here was, that they attend, non-voting members attend all the board meetings, committee meetings. We've now agreed that that's 6. We now agreed they have alternates. We now agreed they don't go away. So now the question is, there's some people that said, well, wait a minute, I need to be in the closed meetings, I need to be in the executive session. So that's the issue, whether the underlying language stays in or not.
Can I ask an embarrassing question first? What's the difference between a closed and an executive session?
Can I give an embarrassing answer?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's the same.
It's a
Yeah.
preference.
Okay.
It's a
Well,
I
preference.
use them the same.
So, yeah.
Like dead corpse.
But you, it really, yeah, question enforcement, dead corpse. But no, you see those, it's like some sort of mantra language, but it basically means the same thing.
Okay.
As far as I can tell.
Executive sounds better, because closed sounds a little.
From a mayor, from a mediator perspective.
Executive, yeah.
We've always wanted to be executive.
So anyway, so this I believe is the issue. And again, this is all part of the same, it's all part of the same logic.
I agree with Chris that they shouldn't be in closed. You gotta have, that should be a small universe.
Yeah.
There's a good reason you're in there.
Very specific
You've gotta
reasons.
control information, and that's just, I think that's a good line to draw.
But I would disagree. I think if you're saying a non-voting member also has other things to contribute and maybe have something that they contribute even when an executive session, we still don't have the vote, which is fine, and y'all have the vote. You can listen to us or not listen to us, or we might have something good or bad. Either way, it doesn't matter, because you have the vote, so what does it matter whether we're in there or not?
Well, to counter that, I can have anybody into an executive session to speak on that issue if I feel that their expertise is warranted. So that still allows me to control the universe and pull that information if I feel that there's somebody on the board that has something salient to bring to it. We can bring them in. That's our prerogative as that closed session.
But you may not know what everyone has to offer at any given point in time. As you begin a discussion, there's no way that you could know, or anybody could, what somebody can bring to the table.
So why don't we just have all of these closed session things in open meetings?
Because
Because
then you
they're-
have the public there too. That's what makes it
Right,
different.
but hey, maybe they've got some data point that we don't know about.
Yeah, but that's not their role.
Yeah.
That is the
But-
role of the non-voting member.
Well, the role of the executive committee is to protect the organization and make sure that these sessions, when when they are specifically lined out by the law, we have to keep that information closely held. To have it out to 6 other non-voting members plus their potential alternates, that information gets out.
I think that I thought that the alternates were not included in executive session. And the thing is, the board members and the non-voting, voting and non-voting are board members. You should be able to participate on the board and represent the board. If you don't know what the board is doing, how do you adequately represent the board? Because that's an area where you're talking about strategic things, a lot of different issues that really do involve both the input and the overall involvement of the other board members.
Yeah. We're gonna have to agree to disagree on that.
I think for me, I mean, and that's, again, this is my kind of, not struggle, but question of exactly a non-voting board member, what does that actually mean? Because I know that part of why we're here today in this kind of different board configuration was that some of the concerns were, there were a lot of people making decisions that were voting on things that didn't necessarily have a financial stake within the organization. And so when I take that to an executive session decision, which is, we're in executive session for a reason. It's because it's highly either confidential or, well, it meets one of the exceptions to the Texas Open Meetings Act. And so then, so the people that are in there, some have the responsibility and the duty and the accountability of voting. And they're representing the financially participating, the founding members, not any financially participating members yet. And then some are in there deliberating that certainly have an interest in what the board is deciding. So that's what I'm saying. This is going to be very confusing, I think, for a little bit to understand, because we didn't change this structure just out of thin air. I mean, there was some very strong interest in doing that, and it was discussed, of course, with different member cities and county officials, and then in this board. So my initial thought is, in fact, I saw a comment from one of the non-voting board members saying that the non-voting board members were sort of likened to an advisory committee. Okay, I can understand that. At least for city council, I mean, we have advisory committees. We have committees that are legislative bodies, planning and zoning, zoning board of adjustments, and other committees that give us recommendations, but they could not be included in our executive sessions, even when we're considering an issue that they have made a recommendation on, unless it meets one of those criteria, right, expertise and things such as that. So I know this is a very sensitive issue, and so I'm really wanting to keep an open mind about it. I think, though, for me, I struggle with it, just because of it's us 5 that are responsible and accountable to the decisions that are made regarding this agency. Just like before us, there were 14 that were responsible and accountable for those decisions, whether they had a financial stake or not within the organization. So that, I mean, it sounds harsh, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but when I look at just how we do it at the municipal level, and then the why the board was reconstituted, or this legislation was sort of advocated for and desired, that's sort of where I land on that.
Mayor, can I ask you a question? What do you feel about us alternates being in the executive session?
As far as the founding members?
Right.
I think that's been a practice in the past, I believe. And I
See,
think
personally, Diane and I, in our agreement, I feel uncomfortable putting on my city manager's hat, being in there, being just from the simple fact of our executive sessions are very, and yours are too, very closed door.
You mean being in when your member is here as
Right,
well?
right.
Oh, okay, no, I thought you meant just being here when
No,
your representative is
no,
out.
when-
Okay, yeah.
When,
You're not a board member.
right,
Right, right,
right.
yeah.
You're not a board member.
Yeah, I thought you meant
No,
sitting
no.
in for you're talking about just coming and, yeah.
Right.
then I would have an issue with that, I think, yeah.
I think
But
the
that
beau-
is what we have been doing. I mean, I have sat
Yes.
in on several executive sessions.
Yes.
Despite the other board members being here.
I think the beauty of DCTA is we are likened with some of our transportation authorities in some areas, and then not so in other areas, right? And I think that's what makes this unique. In fact, when I brought out in the DRMC the fact that we have non-voting members, someone from DART said, you need to come talk to us about us doing that. So, having said that, there's no precedence, right? So we're kind of going along we're not a municipality. We're not, right? So I sometimes have to take off my mayor hat to realize this is not a municipality. And so when we did have the 14 members, and they were voting members, I can't remember, and I look back in the history, at any point where the non-voting members voted contrary to what the member cities' votes were. Now, as I told someone else, that doesn't mean that that couldn't happen, right? So, looking at reconstituting the board as far as voting and non-voting, certainly that was coming in line with what our other transit agencies did, with the exception, and it was a very robust conversation that we had at those meetings with our now county judge and some of the other county commissioners and mayors and city managers and such. So our uniqueness is we have non-voting members, and today, going forward, we're trying to come up with what is that role to look like and what is that to be. And I think someone said that they can be described as advisors. And so if that's the case, then I have to believe that how are they going to accurately advise if they don't have all the information? And what we're talking about as far as our non-voting members or mayors, people that, it's not just, I think we're very, very careful who we ask to come on the board. They have to have certain requirements, and again, they don't vote, but my desire to keep non-voting members was because of my experience with them both outside and inside of executive session, and how so much of that was brought to help us in making our decisions. I feel like it comes to, so Mike and I will disagree. I think even if we're here, I think that the alternates should come in executive session again, just to keep that continuity. But I don't think that I would ask someone to serve on our board as a non-voting member if I didn't trust their credibility, their experience, if the fear is that they could go out and the more people that know it can get, well, yeah, that can happen, and certainly that would be a concern. But I think for me, for the experience that I've had, and I'm probably the only one here that has had, 2 years of experience with the members, that I think not having them have the full information of things that we're making recommendations on or considering information that's been brought to our attention would be a deficit. At the end of the day, we come out and only the 5 of us vote. But would I feel that I would put someone on the board as a non-voting, or accept someone on the board as a non-voting member, that I didn't have complete faith in their credibility, and what I believe that they would do, understanding the role of what happens in executive session or closed session. So my vote would be that they would participate in executive session.
Can I ask a question? If the vote is about one of the non-member cities, would they still be included?
what would we be voting about? Oh, are you talking about like Corinth or something?
Yeah.
Would that be considered a conflict of interest? I would think so.
It just depends on what it is, but it's like a legal
Right.
issue, absolutely, yeah, then they wouldn't be
So
able
that
to-
would be,
Okay.
then they would not.
Is that covered then already, or?
It's covered under the law.
Yeah, because otherwise it breaches attorney-client,
Okay.
because you can't have the adverse party in the session, potentially have the.
Okay.
And to kind of follow up, just another point I think that's important to understand is that we actually have two members of the board that are specifically set here to represent the voice of the county as a whole. So that's their role, to capture that information. And so I think we will get those voices within an executive session without having those additional people in the room.
Regionally, I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, certainly, they represent the county, but, I mean, we have two that, to say that that we wouldn't have any other information, that they would have all the information of Frisco or Corinth or Flower Mound or the Colony or whatever, I wouldn't agree with that.
So it's a question of clarification, because you said a couple of times, Dan, when you were talking, that you had experience over the last 2 years with the board member. I don't think were there non-voting board members on the board prior to this change?
No,
They were all,
there were
they were all
not.
voting,
They were all-
they were all
Right.
voting
They were all
members, is that
voting
correct?
members.
Right.
All right, because I thought I heard, so,
No,
So-
what I was saying was that, yes, they were all voting members, but I recognize personally that they were not member cities. So, you know, again, looking at that from that different perspective.
okay. Well, to me, I think I heard you say, which is news to me, that this is sort of a precedent. In other words, there's not very many transit agencies that have non-voting members, number one, and number two, that are part of executive session. Now, I don't know about,
I don't know about that.
okay, all right.
I was just saying,
No, I don't, no.
right,
Know what, I'm,
That have
Of any
non-voting.
that have non-voting members.
right.
I
This
think
is,
if you look a lot of times at the history of too, what are some of the subjects we've gone into executive session for? Because I think, look at, acquisition of real estate.
correct.
The review of those that the board, employs. Now, it's different because we're only gonna be 5 individuals that vote on that, but you want the input of other people. Legal advice as it relates to pending litigation. Do you want just 5 in there, or do you want the non-voting members in there also? Those are probably the main biggest.
Those are the big three.
Those are the big three that will usually go into executive. And I think maybe twice for security. We're talking about, type of security that's employed, throughout our,
And so to your point, I can say, for instance, and he's not here, Raymond, our CEO, will be coming up with his evaluation soon. I mean, who's going to evaluate him? I mean, the truth is, y'all have been board members since July, right? Do we exclude those who have worked with him over the years and their opinion in executive session? So I mean, that's a great point when we talk about just the knowledge base that's happened over the few years, and how would we evaluate this man if we have our board not sitting in, who have actually worked with him over the years?
So could you, at different times, recommend that they participate if there is a particular topic
Yeah.
that you would like them to be part of? So for instance, with this review,
You could bring other people into that if you felt that they had specific information or data. I mean, that's one of the things in the law. We can bring in experts or people we perceive would have expertise on that conversation.
be careful with that, because
Right.
under the law, you bring in someone who is essentially relevant. So I don't know if we want to fall on that and say, okay, yeah,
Right.
non-voting members, yeah, sure, we want you to listen to this. You're not necessarily relevant, we want you to listen to it because you may benefit from it, but not necessarily relevant to the actual, to itself. So if we want to go down that road, we would probably want to write something into the bylaws saying, unless invited in by the, by the members. Or by the voting members,
And that
unless-
becomes difficult to me, in my opinion. We've talked about that from a legal perspective. I mean, do we want to be doing that? Yes, no, or,
My concern is more specifically when we've identified a piece of real estate and we're gonna be talking about how much we're gonna pay for it. You know, that needs to be a small universe of people, in my opinion. When we're dealing with litigation, I think, you know, making decisions about going forward, settling it, those kind of things, I think that needs to be a small universe of people. I think what the concern is when we're looking at strategic issues, one, I don't know, I think we did have an executive session where it was fairly strategic. Am I remembering this correctly?
And it walked the line
Yeah,
on
so
what
it was-
could
so,
be
I mean,
talked about.
That.
Strategic's gonna have to be related to if legal
Yeah.
advice is,
Yeah.
is
And sure.
embedded or involved in that.
And I think it
Yeah.
was, but in that session, I think it would have been problematic not to have the non-voting members know about that. So is there a way to craft it so that we can put
Absolutely.
categories where non-voting members will participate and where they won't? You know, where the impact is.
I think you could craft something where the board could vote to include relevant speakers to the closed session.
You could do that very easily, and if you wanted to have certain topics that they're in or out for, you can specify them.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we can make it as tight as we wanted, right?
Yeah, 'cause right now
I'd
it's-
rather make that decision in advance.
Yeah, right now
Like,
it's one-stop.
I don't think voting on a case-by-case
I
basis
do not.
is the way to go. I mean, that's just kind of a knee-jerk, and we need to make a decision about what we want them in or not in.
Sam, just to ferret out real quick, just
Yeah.
as you went down the example, like say, let's say it's real estate and
Uh-huh.
a price or whatever you're gonna pay with, what's the concern, like if somebody else was in there? In terms of, because I guess from my standpoint, you have board governance rules, of course, we can't go out and say, we can't do those kind of things outside of this anyway. You have somebody like me, I don't know about most everybody else in here, but who's pretty darn good in real estate and has done it for a long time, might have some good information for you to have on that specific subject. It may not be every subject, but I just wonder what the concern would be to know. something like
I
that.
have a personal experience where, when I had my litigation hat on, and there was a disclosure of what was gonna be paid, and I found it almost impossible to have any teeth in the disclosure of that. In other words, it's a matter of public concern, right, to the voter. So if that person decides to go rogue and disclose the information,
There's no teeth.
there's nothing you can really do about it. That person is subject to no penalty whatsoever, in my opinion. There's I mean, so.
They just lose legal cover, which may or may not be relevant to them.
What's a matter of integrity?
Yeah, and it is.
Have you seen
but-
politics in America today?
But
Just-
we're not talking about
We're not
politics, we're
talking.
talking about
Yeah.
DCTA.
And I mean, yeah, to some extent, it's just a.
We can shoot them if they do that then.
There you go.
That's Texas.
Yeah, Frank is shanking his head. You can't shoot him. I mean, so that's where I'm coming from. I've had that personal experience where somebody went rogue, and you just, and that is my specific concern. When you're talking dollar amounts, when you're talking about litigation strategy, if somebody in the room doesn't disagree with you and they want to make it public to get a different outcome, I think they can, and I don't think you can do a damn thing about it.
And I think when we talk about, to your point, Sam, you're talking about the long-term strategy. Do we want to take this rail, or do we want to go off this line, or we want to go there? That's not a closed session.
No, yeah, that's open.
That's open. The only thing that would make that a closed session is if we wanted to litigate or buy property based on one of those decisions. So the public conversation's already out there, or should be, about which way are we gonna build out, or what type of.
Well, those strategic decisions can involve specific pieces
We-
of property
we-
that you don't want.
This property, acquisition of right away.
Then you gotta, but you know what?
Yeah.
We're in the rail business. I mean, there's only
So many.
so much. So, I mean, by nature of where we are, yeah, that backs us into a corner, but those specific ones, by law, we can't sit there and talk about strategy in closed session. We can talk about land acquisition in closed session. So I mean, that's a distinction, I think, that's,
Litigation, we talk about strategy in closed session.
yeah, you can talk about, litigation strategy, but not DCTA strategy of how we're going to move people through the region.
Strategy about buying property,
Yes,
litigation,
yes.
or.
Yeah, but there's a couple things. One, if somebody's gonna go rogue and say something, it could just as easily be a member of the board. Whether you're voting or non-voting, any person can do that, and you have no control. I mean, so that's not necessarily, and, you know.
I just want to limit the number of suspects.
Right, I understand.
Yeah.
The other
I
thing
mean,
is,
that's-
number
I
of
mean, that's-
suspects.
And the law
The other thing
sets
is,
out.
I attended the APTA conference, and one of the things, they did some great training. One of the things they talked about was so critical for board members is one of your primary roles is to represent that board in other environments. And we always had the advantage of a number of people, so we spread our representation quite well. Well, if you take it down to only those 5 people know what's going on in many cases, then, and I'm not talking about something you would disclose, but there's a lot around it. And just understanding what's going on, whether you say it or not, but understanding in that communication with legislators, with other people, with other entities, that's how can you adequately represent the board and present the best view of it, of the agency, without knowing what understanding.
Without knowing what lawsuits we're in?
No.
Well, I mean, those are the things that we would be talking about in a closed session that you would not have access to.
I've sat through a lot of closed sessions here. I know what goes on and what's being discussed, and I stand by that, what I'm saying.
Again, I think we're too focused sometimes just on the rail, and we've got bus services too that we're now contracting with Compel, with McKinney, with Frisco, and they're non-member cities. Are there discussions, and I don't know, within a closed session, that those strategies are being discussed as far as going future outside our current member cities? Well, I'm sure it is being
See
discussed.
how you-
Yeah, why I say that now.
Yeah.
Should not be in the executive session discussion, that goes back to the overall strategy.
Yeah.
So can we table the elephant in the room and move on this and come back, or? Because I feel like we're gonna be
Can y'all
stuck here
try
for.
to craft something that's
Right.
And I'm sorry, I don't need to take the sides, but I just throw out some ideas. One is, that you're very capable general counsel there's a limited number of topics that you're supposed to be talking about in closed session. And what I've heard is, and I don't know if this is acceptable to anybody else, but I'm just trying to narrow the point of discussion. Concerns about, it sounds like sort of generally speaking expenditures. So we're talking about buying real estate, and maybe talking about litigation. And I've also heard people say, if we're evaluating the executive director, I've heard people say, we want them. Is there a way, and I also like this idea about, or also I'm sensitive to this notion about, let's not one-off this, and every meeting we're having a vote for whether that comes in or not, but let's try to.
Sure.
Is there any way to, looking at the finite number of things you're supposed to be talking about in closed session, is there any way to say they're in on these and they can be excluded from these? Does that help at all, or no?
I think it would help me.
To have a list, to have just.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real short list, I mean, right? And and I'm sorry, this may not be acceptable to y'all, but I'm just trying to narrow this down. It sounds like it was litigation might be a concern, talked about buying real estate might be a concern, and then the flip side was personnel issues. I thought there was support, and maybe there should be input. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does for me, but I want to say this. I understand the comment, Diane, that you made about that if we evaluate Raymond, that, you're the only one here other than the non-voting members that can do that, and I just disagree with that. I mean, I've worked with Raymond now for over a year, and I've been probably in as many meetings as with him as I have in a year's worth of these board meetings. So I don't accept that. I think I can have just as good a say and input into how I think we should look. I'm just going to put it out there, all right? We're here for a reason. I mean, we decided to restrict this board to 5 people for a lot of different reasons. And that meant moving some people into a non-voting situation. You even said that they never voted against the member cities.
in a board meeting.
Correct.
Which is very surprising to me when you have 14 people and it's all unanimous every time. That's just very interesting. I don't mind coming up with a list, but we made these changes for a reason, and we can always go back and change them again if we need to. So I'm okay with maybe coming up with a list, but I feel pretty strongly that to be able to have non-voting board members be in every executive session, I just cannot agree with that. I can agree with maybe a subset, and I will put my mayor hat on. When we're in executive session, when you come out, there's very few, hardly any decisions you're going to make in executive session outside of our public utility that you can actually make a decision in executive session without going out to the public and presenting to the public what it is that you're doing. So from the standpoint of that there's a lack of information on what's available in a closed session, they're very narrow, they're very confined, and I think that the information typically that comes out in an open session from an executive session will pretty much reflect what went on in the executive session. So I'm okay with coming up with a list, but if it's a carte blanche, including all the non-voting members in every executive session, I'm going to struggle with that, and I won't be able to accept that.
And I would want carte blanche, but if I have to settle for that, that's what I will do.
Why don't you allow us, we're making terrific progress, and up until now.
Oh, we're still making progress. We're making progress.
What I've been pleased with is in every other case, you all have gone in the direction of being more inclusive. And I think that should send a message, I hope. This issue has gotten us stalled, but allow us to come back based on this good discussion. And let me generate some options for the entire group to consider and see if we can come up with something that everyone can live with. And I'll start by, we ought to advantage ourselves of the fact that the spectrum of things you should be talking about in closed session is a narrow spectrum. So let's try to see if we can avail ourselves of that.
And that's my job when we're in closed session, to keep it.
That's right.
And that's really my goal, to move obligations from this chair. Okay, all right. Okay, so thank you. That was a very respectful conversation. All right. This is something I put in on my own initiative, and I'm not sure if it matches your reality. And what it essentially says, to cut through all the words, is I was kind of worried that if an alternate is not a board member, unless the regular appointed person there, do you want those people participating in meetings, or does it become, you have issues of it just becoming kind of a cabinet? I don't know. It seems to me as though, from what I've observed, it seems like maybe I was maybe I was oversensitive. The question is, do you want alternates being able to participate in any discussion matters before the board or a committee? Okay, that really is what it boils down to.
Gone from them to y'all.
And really, on my own initiative, I really thought if you've got someone there representing an entity, then maybe you want to say that's the person that talks to that entity. Maybe you want a difference between voting numbers. I don't know, but that's what it says now. And people basically, there was a number of people said no, that you don't want to do that. Does that make sense? Do you hear what the question is? Do you hear what the issue is? So you want alternates being able to participate in meetings even when the regular appointed board member is present.
I'm okay with that.
I mean, we've had good input from
Yeah.
it. I mean, in practice already. And I think I was at least one of the people who struck through not participating in discussion. And I guess I struck through otherwise be considered a board member for any purpose, because they kind of seem to circle back to the participating in discussion thing. I can't vote, but I don't want them having their 3 minutes at the start and not be able to say, you know, hey, what about this, or do you consider that? And I think the reality is, right, no one wants to say, hey, whoa, you actually can't talk right now.
No, you know.
Can you have the
Commissioner-
option, though?
Even though the commissioners, you know, yeah. Yeah, well, maybe only the actual member of that entity can shut down the alternate, right?
I'll leave that to the chair.
That's right, where we call on them, and, you
Yeah.
know, like, just a great example, Mike and I disagree on something, it's okay, let's have the discussion. But I think they do bring valuable input. I would say, you know, if you think it's, hey, I want to hear from any thoughts, maybe Claire, that you have, or Brian? John?
We call those clarifications.
Oh, Claire, oh my gosh. So I'm okay with them participating.
Okay, I think I was off base with that. Okay.
Are they allowed, and I guess in the executive sessions as well?
He's gonna work on that.
Yeah, he's
Just thought I'd throw it out there so y'all have another bomb to play with.
Yeah.
Well, we had the city manager already throw it out there.
Oh, I know, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Good job, Mike.
Okay, I'm kind of sort of backing up a little bit though, Diane, in what you said earlier, because the conversation that we have always had is that your preference was, and I thought that was the feeling of the whole board, that the alternates participate, come to most or all meetings, and do participate in the executive session, so we are as up to speed as we can be. In the event that there is an absence, we can jump right in and not feel like we're missing out, or we don't know what's going on, or whatever. So that has been, since I've attended, what I have heard. And I just want to clarify that that is still the case, and if it's not, then I have.
You're not coming again, yeah. Well, I think, and the question of them participating in executive session, and this is probably the real point for me, and that is, if they're gonna have to sit in this chair and vote, they're gonna vote. In other words, if an alternate is gonna sit in this chair and have to make a vote, and all the responsibilities that go along with that, I think it's important for them to have the opportunity to understand exactly what's going on. So when it comes to the whole non-member thing, I think for me, the real important thing also is the voting aspect. In other words, we are casting a vote, so if someone's gonna be casting a vote, they certainly need to be able to have as much information as possible, because that, I mean, if something were to happen and I'm out for three months with an illness or something, an accident, my alternate's gonna have to be able to step in my shoes as if he has the full rights and privileges of a board member.
And I think we even had a situation where a board member left in the middle of the meeting and the alternate picked up,
Mhm.
you know, like.
Yeah,
so I mean,
y'all
I think
did that.
We did that.
Well,
Just a different
see,
situation.
That's okay, because once the board,
Yeah.
then that other person should say, because.
Becomes the board
Okay,
person.
When they're
because I
both
just
there.
want to get direction here. I thought what we spoke about a minute ago was that,
The exact opposite.
yeah.
Well, Mike's uncomfortable with it, but he's used to being uncomfortable with me, so.
Mike, is that uncomfort, just,
It is,
I'm
and
gonna
I
put you
didn't
on the
speak
spot,
up at that time.
is
I
that
should have
a
at that
function of you
No,
being the
that's
city
good.
manager, or is that a function of you
It
just
is,
being the
and I was,
alternate?
as an alternate, I was alternate for Paul Pomeroy, who was our board, you know, and I did not attend a lot of meetings, but if I needed to sit in, he would call me up, we'd sit in my office, Mike, these are the issues, this is what's happening. He would give me, you know, crash course, executive session, we may have it, this is what it's about. So, you know, there was that education process that I took upon the board rep and myself to get as much knowledge as possible so that I could sit in that chair and make that vote. I will say I'm more conservative on the closed session, executive session. I like a tighter ring because the city manager, of what we go through. I like a tight, closed door. I personally, as Diane and I have said, we have a difference of opinion. She's there to represent me and make the decision for the city. I don't need to be in there and hearing every bit of everything that what's happening there.
And I think, but when Paul Pomeroy was here, you had 14 people voting. My concern is now with only 5 people voting, I really want you to be here as much as you can, Mike.
No, you do. I'm here.
Y'all two work it out and get back with us.
This is just sweet Diane.
I
mean, I think the difference between y'all's situation and like Shannon and Paul, and we don't have that connection, you know, politically. I mean, I met Paul for the first time, you know, at these meetings, and likewise Shannon. So we're not doing the download thing that y'all naturally are going to do with the Highland Village, or yeah, I mean, it's just a totally different type of relationship. And I think it's we would lose something if they weren't there, that y'all wouldn't.
I agree.
Okay.
Frank's
Is that clear as mud?
Yeah, I'll go in.
So it sounds to me as though, consistent with your past practice.
Yes.
The voting, at least the voting alternates have been in closed session. So this, we need to be sure that this doesn't prevent that from happening.
Correct. Mine. Are we all?
Yep.
On that, I'm fine.
Okay. Are we cool with that?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Pretty good. All right, I'm sorry, I thought I was going the other direction.
No, we're good.
All right. Everybody matters. Oh, good, okay. All right, I think this is a relatively small issue, but I wanted to bring this up. We talked earlier about how many board members it takes to, voting board members it takes to put something on the agenda. And we explained why 3 doesn't work, but we also had someone who suggested 1. And I'll let that person explain that. The argument for it, I would assume, is it's a pretty small group of people. So if one person thinks it's important, isn't that enough to get it on the agenda? The counter argument is that you will hear against having just 1 is that if you can't convince at least one other voting member that this is worthy of going on the agenda, why, maybe that's not that high a hurdle to set. So on this one, I would suggest you leave it at 2. 2 is pretty standard. If you can't find somebody else to say, yeah, that's a good idea, then maybe that just shouldn't make the board.
I mean, I've loved Diane telling me, hey, if you want it on there, put it on there, and I think that's great, but I think the 2 hurdle is I mean, at least you got 2 people that are
Right.
interested in yay.
Yeah, and bear in
Or
mind,
nay,
you're not
whatever
saying
it
you're
is.
going to support it, all you're saying is this is worthy
Talk
of
about it.
discussion.
Yes.
And
Right.
if you can't meet that standard, then,
Right.
anyway, okay. Good? All right,
As much
this,
as I like 1.
and I don't know how to do this other than just to go through this list. These are, it's a compilation of additional major decision approval vote issues from at least 2 commentators that added this list, and I know Joe's got a clarification on at least one of them. But I just thought we'd go through this, and if anybody's got real problems about making this again, it's at 3/5 and 1 county commission, appointed member.
Maybe I can stop you. Is there a statutory guideline
No.
on what the major decision authority
No,
is?
there's not. It's simply, what you've got, and again, it's just like having a supermajority for a quorum. Unless your legislation allows supermajority voting, you can't do it. It's all just majority. But your legislation allows you to pick topics for a supermajority vote, and it's your discretion as to what those topics are. Is that responsive?
Yeah, and kind of remarkable.
Here's your list.
That's left a lot to negotiate.
So let me just run through it quickly. Sale of a capital asset, remember, that's been elevated from $5,000 to $75,000, presumably for this reason. Approval or dismissal of any employees report directly to the board. Contract with the authorities, general counsel, what do you think about that one, Joe?
It's great.
Next. And then, and again, this is a change, which you have, what I think maybe I can't remember. The question is it any change to the service plan? That's a change or any change to the service plan. That would be a major decision approval of.
What do we mean by that?
Yeah.
Well,
What is the service plan?
that was the one I thought maybe we benefit from, because I'm not sure if this makes sense, how granular a decision that is.
Yeah, when you say any, it's all inclusive, so changing a route, even a small amount would be a change in our service plan.
And that could be like
Changing a bus
Teasley's
stop.
under construction, so you need to go around it.
Right, we'd have to wait
Wait a month to.
a month to do that.
That's not my job.
So
No.
typically in your service plan, there's standards that say
I mean, it's
any,
not- I don't want
any
it to be my job.
substantial change in the in the service. So if we change more than 25% of a route, 25% of the service plan, you gotta come to the board for that.
How about material and permanent? In other words, if there's construction, you got to round around it for a couple of months. I don't want to be involved in that decision either.
Then you have to describe material.
That's part of me being a lawyer and dealing with that universe all the time. I mean, that's just kind of the best you can do.
I
And
think,
then just figure out a
I
policy.
think the term that was in there, I can't remember if I put it in there, if it's already in there. I think the term, you had a materiality component in there. And I had exactly this concern, that you decide to change a stop, so, and suddenly you're.
Yeah.
You have to wait for a month.
I do not want to decide what color brick goes on a building. I don't want to have none of that.
I think don't know who submitted that, but I do believe that the intent would be, if you're gonna add a non-member city, or if you're gonna contract with somebody, if you're gonna change what are the area of our service, then that's a board decision.
Yeah.
If you're gonna materially change a route from a fixed route to a zone, or going back the other way, that's a material change. And so, to me, that's material, but it's not any and all, or a is more or less saying everything would have to come, or we'd have to be very specific in the language as to what comes before the board.
Because the practice is now, let's exclude for discussion purpose, major decision approval vote. Right now, if there's a certain level of change to a service plan, it comes before a board vote, and it would be just simple majority, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Certainly not any change, so 6 would create a whole new, I mean,
Yeah.
whether it's majority vote or not, you're saying bring any change to the board, and I don't wanna do that.
Probably have to meet twice a month.
I don't wanna do that.
I'd be out.
I mean, I'm okay.
Just as a note of reference, at any point in time, if we make a 25% change or more to any of our services, it requires a Title VI analysis. So I think that's kind of the threshold that we have utilized in the past.
So that's
where
the
that
internal
25%.
policy trigger.
Yes.
So
But like, if you wanted to define material for a material change, that might be a good point, because at that point too, we would also be presenting the Title VI analysis that we had done prior to asking your approval for the
I
change.
just want to make sure I'm clear on my thinking here. Major decision approval vote, that's the two-thirds of the founding members and an additional vote.
Three-fifths, yeah. Three-fifths and one of the.
Two of the three.
it's 2/3.
Some people we had this discussion.
really wanted to say 3/5.
Yeah.
Well, I think,
Why don't the bylaws match what we say? I don't understand. No.
Okay, so do we want the trigger that's already sounds like pretty much extant? Do you want to put in, I don't think I would say material and permanent, because permanent, I think I would say material and non-temporary to work on.
Yeah, and I would make this list as short as possible. In my opinion, it needs to include the budget, and everything else to me is peripheral. Because the budget is the strategic vision. I mean, that is our primary function. Is a board. We want to set the thing in motion, and I want the staff to execute that. And we speak through our budget primarily. And so I completely agree that 2 of the 3 of the founding members need to agree on how we're going to spend our money, and that establishes our vision. Everything else to me, maybe I think the general counsel's good, the executive director's good, but and maybe the new member policy. But everything else to me is just kind of like, why?
Okay, let's bear in mind, these are the additions, right?
Yeah.
So there's a whole list that these go into. This isn't exclusive. These are the ones that we added.
Well, I want to add as few as possible.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
This
So-
seems like a good number.
Yeah. 60? Yeah, oh, geez.
Well, that's why it goes 6, 10, 12. These are
Well, like 4 and
Goes to 21 actually.
yeah, there are a lot.
4 and 14. I mean, so our executive director reports
Yeah.
to us as an employee. Can we get rid of one of the number 14?
Yeah, 4 just gives you, I mean, 14 is redundant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Joe and I are the ones that report at a board, so.
And that captures any future that we might create.
That would also capture contract too.
Well,
Section 5.
employees or contracts. Report to the board. Yeah, you could collapse not a lawyer.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah, those are right there.
yeah, so 10 and 15, yeah.
We can collapse these. But I think the material in these is important.
16, I think could be a problem. Yeah, I don't know if we'll
Yeah, 16 we may
And
need
maybe
to
I
have
wasn't clear earlier. I mean, so there is a statutory list, correct?
No, it's in your previous.
It's in the bylaws. It's in the current bylaw.
So
Right,
this
correct.
isn't, none of the ones up here or in section 5, major decision approval, none of those are required by statute.
No, sir.
Okay,
None of those are
and I
required.
got confused when you said these are just additions.
No, I'm sorry,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm easily
This-
confused. It's okay.
No, I'm good at confusing you. So this, there's a list that was in, the draft bylaws that we sent. My recollection is that nobody took any of those out. So I didn't repeat those. So nobody took any of the ones that we had proposed out, and so these are all additive to what was, so I thought we could safely focus, since nobody appeared to have problems with the list that was there, I thought we could focus on the ones that folks had added. Maybe I was wrong in doing that, but that's what I meant by added.
You were not wrong. Okay, I apologize.
No, it's fine. So we've conflated, I mean, we've skinnied this down to the ones that are repetitive. And, what other, are there
David,
others?
you have a question?
I was gonna try to clarify the list of kind of, I think, where we are with what's remaining and what's being collapsed into other items. So, we were gonna keep number 4, because we thought
Correct.
that would
Correct.
subsume items 5 and 14. And then we were gonna keep,
Well, wait a minute, because you're not
They
not
are.
an employee.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
5, it wouldn't be 5.
Yeah, I think we keep the authority to serve council, I think five
Okay.
stays.
okay? And then, we thought that, section 15 was duplicative of section 10, so we'd get rid of 15.
Very clearly.
And then the only other change I have so far is what we discussed regarding the service plan, changing that to material and non-temporary.
Is that what you're looking for, or do you want the hard trigger of the 25%?
Well, but
That's
part of that's
automatic.
adding new service could be, so you can't, I mean, I don't know, I'm just,
No, I think they were saying 25% could be used as a definition for the word material. If you needed to
Trigger the
define
title.
material
Yeah,
somewhere.
Title
Title
VI.
6.
Got it.
So, yeah, so an addition to the definition of material would be
This,
something that triggers a Title VI.
got it. Got it.
Okay.
Does that make sense, David?
Yes, and those are the only items I have so far, so if there's things we didn't mention,
Yeah, we'll
let me know.
we'll visit 16.
Yes, no. Yeah. So, I love the flow of where we're going. We're 2 hours in. Would y'all be open for a 10-minute break?
where,
Oh, are we gonna do 16?
Yeah, on 16, where discusses the approval of agreement with authority with the labor union. We're gonna talk a little bit about our, during the regular meeting about that, so I'm thinking maybe we can just, and we'll discuss that there, and then we'll provide that information back to you at the next meeting with the edits to that. So,
Okay, is that it?
yep.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
So it
that's where it's
is
getting wrapped.
2:08, 2:18.
Thank you.
all right, thank you.
That's where it's getting wrapped up.